Good morning. I want to share a short tale this morning of St Columba. This is taken from the life of St Columba. St Columba was an early Christian saint who sailed from Ireland to northwest Scotland and set up camp on the Isle of Iona, a very magical island off the northwest of Scotland. And this wonderful book is lots of stories recorded by a scribe of his life and the miracles he performed, and it's really wonderful because there are so many of them, and some of them are very minor, which adds a sort of layer of authenticity to it because of the, some of them are bigger miracles, and some of them had like tiny little things that happened. And particularly this morning because I was up there last year on Iona, I have a very dear friend who lives on the island. It's a very small island. Only 100 people or so live there. And many pilgrims come because of the abbey and the sacredness. And there's a distinct aura the moment you arrive on the island. And it's not an easy place to get to either. You have to go across another island, Mull, the Isle of Mull, to get to it. And it's a major ferry journey even just across to Mull from the northwest of Scotland, which is itself very isolated. So it's a special place. And he was obviously an extraordinary man. And the tale this morning is about his passing, and it's just simple but sweet, because he was an old man, and one morning he spoke to his kind of closest disciple, I guess. He was living there really on the island with his monks, and his closest disciple was pushing him around in a cart, because he was a very old man by then, and pushed him around the other side of the island where he wanted to be involved right up to the end of his life in the working of the monastery and support the people and bless the place. And so they were pushing him in his cart to the other side of the island, and then he famously blessed the island and all the people, and that blessing is said to be the thing that creates the holiness. And there's a place, a cross was erected at the place where he blessed the island, and that cross is still there today. And then, so he then spoke to his closest disciple about his passing, and he said, I was going to pass this Easter, and my Lord gave me full permission to leave then, and I was ready to go, but then I just didn't want to sully that festival with sadness, so I've waited, and I wanted you to know that I'm going to be leaving tomorrow at midnight, but I'm telling you this, and you mustn't tell anyone else. And of course his disciple wept, and that morning they were in the abbey, and St Columba had his face lit up in a very inexplicable way, and as he was praying, and he was looking up at the rafters of the abbey, and his monk said to him afterwards, my Lord, what was happening? And he said an angel came and filled the abbey and then left through the tower, and it came to retrieve a loan that it had promised to humanity, and they didn't really know what he meant until the next day, and they realised what the loan was. The loan was his soul. And that next day he came to the abbey, and it was approaching midnight, and they would pray at that time. They would go in to pray, and he ran in, hobbled in as fast as he could to the front, and they hadn't lit the candles yet. And he was somewhere at the front up by the altar, but it was dark. And then his disciple, who knew, came running in. He'd been caught doing something else, and said, "Where's my Lord, my Lord?" And he forced it, pushed his way through down the abbey with it in the dark, feeling the pews, and made his way to the front, where he found his master dying by the altar. And he called all the monks around, and they all gathered around and held the master as the master was departing, and then the master kind of did his final blessing. He couldn't speak. He just did his final blessing with his hand on all his monks and smiled, and he was filled with light, and the whole place was filled with the light of his passing. And he told a monk previously, there were all these then miracles that took place over the next 3 days as they buried him and did all the rites of passing. And one of them was that one of his monks had said, "When you die, Lord, all the people from all the northwest of Scotland and Ireland will come and celebrate your life and passing." And he said, "No, that's not going to happen." He made a prophecy, and he said, "It will only be at the monks. It will only be my close friends who will be able to celebrate my life and burial." And as it happened, that after he died, there was a thunderstorm that night. A terrible storm arose, and it cut off the island, so no one could get through. So the monks performed 3 days of rites just with St Columba. And there were other things, like a saint on the east coast of Ireland, a well-known sage, had a big vision that night of St Columba passing, and told all his monks that St Columba has left this night. And there were other accounts of fishermen and people working in the fields and there were many accounts of people that saw this huge pillar in the sky, a pillar of light at around midnight in the dark. This was in June. But the light lingers long in northern Scotland at that time. But there's huge events in the heavens, and you often hear these stories. So there was all this, panoply with the great man leaving. And he was a very humble man, in fact. And I just thought to share this simple story of his passing, that the great teachers always know exactly when they will pass and when they will depart, because our lives are measured, and they're measured exactly to every second. And the one that's truly in tune with the rhythm of the inner life can always feel, the timing of the coming and the going of the life force, not just in us, but also in others. And so I encourage you, if you're interested in early Christian saints, like to really one day perhaps visit the Isle of Iona, and you will feel the presence of this being there. And it has a very specific energy, a very pure energy, a white light. And perhaps you could, if you haven't already experienced that, get some of that energy and breathe it into your own soul and be lifted and inspired by someone that lived many thousands of years ago on a remote part of northwest Scotland, but had a vast impact just through his simple devotion to Christ and Christ's teachings. And the spirit of Christ and the spirit of those higher celestial energies lived inside him and inside those who surrounded him and worked with him, the raiment of the Master. These wonderful tales of his life and the miracles, that performed around or happened around it. Oh, one thing I forgot is that as he was the day before, he was sitting resting by this cross, having blessed the island. A white horse, came with a cart. The horse that was used on the island to bring the ferry provisions across the island. And it came and it put its head in his lap and started weeping. And several monks were there to record this, that the horse was weeping and frothing, and it was its head in his lap. And so St Columba said, "Isn't it amazing that the Lord's creatures, even though we humans don't know these things, most of us, but the creatures know that the horse knew his master was leaving that night, And he came and they said, "Come on, let's move on." And St Columba said, "No, let the horse, let him grieve. Let him grieve." And I thought it was another beautiful little story. So I find these stories just really uplifting and simple and beautiful, and they remind us of another reality, of another time. But it is our reality. It is this time as well. These things are alive and possible, and particularly in the world that we see today, where we worry so much about the future of our species and the planet, and yet underneath everything is a mission and a pattern and a reason. And if we can stay connected to that, then we stay connected to the source of all being. And that's the beauty of these simple stories. So I hope you find that one inspirational and uplifting in your day, wherever you are. Blessing of St Columba be upon us all.